I hope that the big lesson from all of this is you've got to communicate the stuff properly, you've got to test it before you go out with it, and it's, governing is, there is a funnel, there's a restriction. You can't push everything through in one go. It actually just won't work.
Is this good enough, far enough, quick enough? What's your judgment of this as a U-turn?
Yeah, well, it's certainly what I was calling for, and I think it was important that it was done immediately on the first day of conference, because it was pretty clear to me, people understood that borrowing in order to fund a tax cut for people who were already better off was just not going to cut it in this current climate. And unfortunately, what it was doing was obscuring all the great work that was being done on things like the energy cap, actually worth vastly more in terms of cost and spending. And making people forget about that and be very angry about this tax cut. So it needed to be done. I'm pleased to see that's happened, and I'm pleased to see that the government's listened to me and others.
How did it happen in the first place, this? Because the energy support package should have been a good news story that was allowed out for people to recognise that this was going to help them all out. But instead, these extra policies would just seem to be thrown onto it with no OBR support. Do you have an understanding how this could have been allowed to have happened?
I think they tried to do too much too quickly. They came in, remember, of course there was that long extended mourning period for Her Majesty, and I think a sense of urgency which got the better of them. I thought that a lot of the measures in the budget were very good, including things like that energy price cap, which actually provides more support here, I think, than anywhere else in Europe in terms of the amount of money being spent. So there was some really good stuff in there. But they didn't road test it, they didn't communicate it, and as the Prime Minister's actually said since, you can't just spring this stuff on people. You've got to build a case. I actually believe in lower taxes. I want to see a lower rate across all taxes. But the idea that you can just kind of bring that out one day and not give anyone any notice and spook the markets, it spooked MPs, of course, and knocking on doors, perfectly obvious, it spooked the public as well. And it's absolutely right, it's being changed.
Do you think that are you now happy with everything else? Now this one tax cut has been withdrawn, are you happy with everything else? Because there's still the spectre, is there not, Grant Shapps, you'll be able to tell us this, of spending cuts, widespread spending cuts, because there's not going to be another new public sector settlement. We've still got very high inflation. There's talk from a lot of people, senior in government now, that people are going to have to get used to a bit less spending. Is that acceptable to you?
Well, I think it's better to be honest with people and let them know if that's the case. And, most people, families around the country know that times are tight. They know that energy bills, even with the price cap, the energy bills have been going up. They know that mortgage rates are under pressure. And people aren't stupid. They know why. They know that Putin has invaded his neighbour. And because he did that, fuel supply has been cut, and we've got very high inflation globally. The European inflation is high. It's actually higher than ours in Germany, for example. People understand all that, and they know that one of the things that happens when you have high inflation is that interest rates have to go up in order to keep pressure downwards on inflation. They get that as well. What they don't want to see is their own government contributing to that. This measure was a move too far, and that's why it's right that it's been U-turned on this morning. And it'd be churlish if I didn't say I welcome that. I do.
But should we be as forgiving as all that? This cost us 65 billion quid to fix. The Bank of England had to pour that in. We'll end up with the bill for that eventually, won't we, Grant? That's the issue. That this is part, to stabilise the market. It costs 65 billion quid because of a poorly conceived economic policy. This is not a zero-sum equation. This is not something that we can just sort of brush off. This is a serious mismanagement of the economy 10 days into a new regime. That's serious, isn't it, for a party that prides itself on competence and being trusted with the economy?
Well, of course, what the bank's done will be able to unwind itself, and I think that's very important that it does. This is the gilt purchasing, but I think it is true that this wasn't well thought through, and actually even the Prime Minister has said it wasn't well communicated. I hope that the big lesson from all of this is you've got to communicate the stuff properly. You've got to test it before you go out with it, and it's governing is, there is a funnel, there's a restriction. You can't push everything through in one go. It actually just won't work. So you've got to time and sequence things. You've got to build an argument around why you're doing particular things, and then you can go ahead and move ahead. And I think there was a sort of that leadership election went on a very long time. I think that Liz Truss felt that she wanted to move forward quickly. Kwasi would have felt the same, and they tried to do everything in that mini budget at the same time. It wasn't much of a mini budget; it was a massive budget, in fact. And that didn't work. And I think when somebody recognises that and goes in the opposite direction, it's right to recognise that they've done the right thing. They have just done exactly what I was asking for yesterday. So it would be pretty odd if I didn't say I think they've done the right thing today.
You say it's down to communication partly. Liz Truss reportedly said when she was sacking you from cabinet that she was doing so despite you being the best communicator in government. Was that a mistake?
Well, it's what she said. I don't know whether it was a mistake.
It is what she said.
Look, it is what she said, but it's up to her how she runs her government and who she has in it. In a way, I admired her straightforwardness in the way she did that. But not related to me, but more broadly speaking, you do have to communicate in government. It is, in fact, central rather than some sort of afterthought. And if you don't, it spooks your MPs, it spooks the market, and it really worries families. I mean, I was knocking on doors Saturday morning talking to my constituents in Welwyn Hatfield who were saying things like, I'm taking on an extra shift because I'm so worried about the mortgage rate going up. Now, people understand that mortgage rates are going up. They understand that Putin's an evil man, has invaded his neighbour. It's caused cataclysmic circumstances to the global economy. What they don't understand is if their own government add to that through policies which are not being properly thought through. So it's belated, but it's welcome that that has now been fixed, and I'm pleased to see that this morning.
Grant Shapps, they're going to be looking for money, the government, aren't they? And we're talking about the possibility of spending cuts. There is the giant amount of money sitting there in HS2. How tempted do you think it will be for government to say, do you know what, at the moment we can't afford to spend that money?
So unfortunately for the government, it's a project I know, I inherited it about 15 years into the project. It's a project I know very well as a result. Unfortunately, you couldn't now stop building it and save money because the tunnels are already, miles and miles of tunnels are being constructed, for example, and winding down the contracts at this point were probably more expensive than building certainly the West Coast element of it, nearly all of which is legislated for, and vast amounts of it are already constructed. I think a bit like the West Coast and the East Coast main lines, if you look back with a real sense of history on these things, it will have actually paid for itself over a long period of time because capacity will be the issue in the end rather than speed of that line. But there isn't an easy sort of, I sometimes hear people say, oh, that could save £100 billion. No, it couldn't. In fact, it would probably cost as much to mothball it as it was cost to complete it at this stage. That train has already left the station.
Talking of trains that are leaving the station, can you get this back as a party before a next election? We had Charles Walker on the station, I think, on Friday saying the chat now is about how much you're going to lose the next election by and what sort of legacy you give to the incoming Labour government. How gloomy are you, Grant Shapps, now when you survey the field?
Well, that was obviously his chat. I don't agree with him, actually, because, for example, we've had budgets which have gone wrong before. What was called the Omni-Shambles budget, which was 10 years ago by George Osborne, went terribly wrong, pushed us a long way behind in the polls. We still went on to win the 2015 election, but it's certainly not a given. And we need to work better and a lot harder or a lot more smartly than we have in the last 10 days or so if we're going to do that. And, I want to see Conservatives win. I believe that we are nothing if we're not the government, the party of sound money. And that's why, again, this U-turn was incredibly important this morning, and I'm pleased to see it happen. So no, the game's not up. I don't agree with Charles. 2 years is a long time in life. It's an even longer time in politics. So no reason why we can't, but it's going to take smart, intelligent leadership, and I will be urging the government on to provide it.